Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Crafting and Crime Daily. If you are new to the channel, I am so glad to have you. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode of my recaps of the Chad Daybell case. Day 14 is in the books. Today's testimony is day 15, but I will be recapping what happened on day 14. Yes, let me get my notes ready. We had 5 witnesses take the stand. The first person to take the stand was the medical examiner, and we're also going to hear from some neighbors, and then we're going to get into some insurance information. So let me just tell you, if you're new, I have all of this playlisted on my podcast that is available through YouTube Music, also on my channel. Everything is playlisted, and you can go back and watch what you've missed. You can get it all recapped. Chad Daybell is charged with the murder of Tylee Ryan and JJ Vallow and his wife, Tammy Daybell. Now, he's currently married to Lori Vallow Daybell, who is in jail serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole for the same thing, and is currently in Arizona facing trial for the murder of her former husband, Charles Vallow. Yes, they got rid of their spouses so they could be together, and then they got rid of the kids. It's a sad story, very sad story, all in the name of religion. Yes. So, first person on the stand was the medical examiner, and he spent quite a bit of time. He goes through his background, his education, what is a medical examiner, what is a forensic examination of the body. Where are my notes? Sorry, I went way back on the notes. Sorry about that. Found them. Anyway, so he spent a bit of time for the jury explaining the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner. And I'll just tell you, a coroner is elected. They don't have to have any medical experience whatsoever. It just so happens that the coroner that responded to the death of Tammy Daybell was an EMT. So she had a little bit of medical knowledge, but no ability to do autopsies. Coroners do not do autopsies. They can recommend that something be that if a case looks suspicious, that it can go for an autopsy. But remember when she said, we didn't really have a budget for that, remember? Anyway, so he explained, what a medical examiner does, a forensic pathologist, what they do. So in addition to performing the autopsy, he also reviewed medical records. Now he was present in the courtroom at a hearing where the prosecution was asking that the body be exhumed of Tammy Daybell. Now, he played no role. He was just present for the hearing, and the judge said, yes, the body can be exhumed. So he was present he traveled to Springfield, Utah. He was present when the body was exhumed. He escorted that body, so there was never any chance for any tampering of the body. So the chain of custody, he, all the way till it got to his office. Then he explained how he goes about doing an autopsy. You do the external examination. You take a lot of pictures. And he noticed some bruising, and he's got a lot to say about bruising. So some interesting stuff about bruising. So in conclusion, he determined, after all was said and done, that she died from asphyxia. And later on, he said it was related to some form of suffocation. So he said there's a lot of things that can cause asphyxia. Smothering, which I think is what happened in this case. Choking, anything that will block your airway. Drowning is a form of asphyxia. And then he said something interesting. Chemicals can cause asphyxia. Cyanide, remember I mentioned cyanide? And carbon monoxide can cause asphyxia. So the manner of death he determined was homicide. And he explained to the jury that when a medical examiner says a manner of death is homicide, it's not the same as when a prosecutor says homicide. There's two different definitions. So when a medical examiner uses the term homicide, they mean it's just that person died at the hands of another person versus suicide where they die at their own hands or a natural death. And he says sometimes you can't figure out why a person died. And we know that because, you take, for example, Tylee Ryan. We don't know how Tylee Ryan died. We'll never know. Her body was so badly burned and mutilated that we'll never be able to tell why she died. He says some people just die for inexplicable reasons. You just don't know. So after examining the body, he said he saw no evidence of any traumatic injury, no evidence that there was any natural disease process. He examined every organ of her body. No natural disease process. He said there was no anatomic or pathological reason she should have died. But he was given a diagram of a body, and he was asked to show where the bruises were that he saw. And he said, it's very difficult when you're looking at a bruise, unless it's already started to change colors, then you can attach some age to it visually. But if you see bruising, it's very difficult to date and time bruising. But he said, if you cut some of the bruising out of the skin in the lower layers and you put it under a microscope, you can see changes that will indicate to you the timing of the bruising. So where she had bruisings, most of her bruising was her right arm. She had four bruises in this area and then on the back of her arm, as if someone had held that arm down, consistent with that. He said, and he was asked, could it be consistent with some? And yes, it could. And then she had one on her chest and one somewhere else. I don't remember. Nothing on her left arm. Interesting. And he found fluids in her lung. So he said it's not, he was shown pictures of Tammy from the date she died, the pictures that were taken by the coroner. And he addressed the pink frothiness coming from her lungs. He says that's a sign of pulmonary edema, which is something that will happen. You will see that when someone is asphyxiating. And but also you can see it when people have ingested toxins. So he needed to do toxicology, but she had already been embalmed. So I'm thinking, how in the world is he doing toxicology? Well, they have a way. He took portions of her liver and was able to send, and they did an extensive toxicology, sent it to the best lab there is, another lab after that, and there was no signs of any toxins. He said, you'll see people that are on meth, they'll have that pink frothiness, opioids, overdoses, they'll have that because it causes pulmonary edema, I guess. Anyway, so he was asked about signs of seizure activity because they examined the brain as well. I've been to autopsies, and when they went to open the brain, I was like, okay, I'm out. I could watch it up till then, but then when they went to open that brain, I was out of there. I was like, gone. I don't want to see this. I couldn't be a brain surgeon. No. So he did look at the brain. No signs of seizure activity. He said either with the body or the medical records. He went through the medical records. Nothing indicated any seizure activity. And he said it would be very unlikely for a 49-year-old woman to develop seizure activity later on in life. Same with heart conditions. Yeah. Or arrhythmias, because some people have arrhythmias and they just die from an arrhythmia. No signs of an arrhythmia, and very unlikely that she developed an arrhythmia later on in life. Then we're going back to the toxicants. I think I talked about all that. The only thing it did come back with was the Paxil that she was taking pretty regularly for her depression. That's the only thing that showed up. So, and that was not at a toxic level, by the way. And then he was asked, had he responded to this death scene the day she died, would he have recommended an autopsy? He said there was no adequate explanation for her death, absent an autopsy. So, in other words, he would have recommended an autopsy. In other words, everything that Chad was saying to the coroner was not an adequate explanation for why she died. No. So, yes, he would have recommended an autopsy. And going back to the bruising, I forgot to tell you the most important thing. He timed that bruising. He said that bruising occurred at or near the time of her death. And it was consistent with someone being restrained. Also, it could be consistent with someone trying to smother her and someone else restraining her. Could it have been Alex and Chad? Now, Chad was home alone. His son Garth, that lived there, was at work at this haunted house. It was this October. He was working at this haunted house. He doesn't get home till 1 o'clock in the morning. This thing's already happened. Yeah. And the last thing he commented on was the rigor mortis that was present when the coroner responded. He said that indicated to him that she had been dead for quite some time. So this, it wasn't close to the time of death when the coroner got there. Anyway, so interesting testimony. That kind of ties everything up in a nice little bow. That's for Tammy, right? And I think the prosecutor is getting ready I think they're getting near the end of their case. That's what I'm thinking. So they put on a couple of people, Alice Gilbert and her husband, Todd Gilbert. They are neighbors of, and I'm going to combine their testimony because it's very similar, neighbors of Chad Daybell. Now Chad moved to Rexburg in 2014, 2015-ish. They moved to Rexburg in 2017 into the same ward as Chad. And that's when Alice met Chad. Now, Todd was aware of Chad because he had read his books. So he knew who Chad was through reading his books, but had never met him in person until 2017 when they moved into the ward and started going to the same church. And they were neighbors. So they did become friends. Alice was the Relief Society president, which is the women's organization of the church. And she said Tammy was her first counselor. I don't know what that means, but there was 6 of these women that were like head of all the women of the church. And these were 2 of the 6. And they would get together once a week for a couple of hours. And then they would see each other on Sundays in church. And that was from October 2018 until 2019 when Tammy died, that she saw her this often. And she felt like she had grown quite close to Tammy. But she noticed in 2019 there seemed to be some distance between Chad and Tammy that was occurring. And she said the only thing Tammy complained about to her was that sometimes their finances were strained. But other than that, she didn't really complain about anything. She said there was no change in her activity level that she saw, no fainting, no shaking, no slowing down. She says Tammy was a real go-getter. Tammy must have been a whiz at the computer because apparently, many people have testified that they would ask her to do something on the computer and she could do it like that. She was really good at the computer. She learned about, Todd and Alice learned about the death of Tammy Daybell when they got a phone call from Emma, who was sobbing to the point where she really couldn't speak. And then she hands the phone over to Chad, who lets them know that Tammy had passed away. So they go over now Chad tells Todd, can you wait an hour or so before you tell the bishop? Don't tell the bishop. Don't tell anybody right now. Just wait an hour or so. So Alice ignored that. She's like, I knew that the bishop was going to be headed to work, so I went ahead and called him. And we know what happened then. Bishop calls everybody else, and everybody starts heading over to Chad's house to find out what happened to Tammy. So as well did Alice and Todd. They head over to the house. She said the kids were all there, all except for Mark, who's on his mission, but all the kids were there with their spouses. They're all sitting around the living area. They're all crying, except for Chad, who Todd said seemed very businesslike. She said the children seemed stunned. This is what Alice had said. Now, they both inquired, what happened? So Chad tells him that she had vomited and was having this coughing spell around midnight, and that she passed away around 2 a.m. And then that morning he found her on the floor. She had fallen out of bed. And she died of an embolus. This is what he told him, an embolus. So they decided they were going to go get the kids breakfast. So they leave. And as they're leaving, Chad tells them, oh, the funeral's going to be on Tuesday. And Alice is like, Tuesday? Now she's president of the women's organization. And she's like, we can't get this together by Tuesday. Because, there's stuff they got to bake and, invite people. It's a church thing. And she's like, did you have this planned? In other words, pre-planned funeral. He's like, no. She thought it was very, very quick, very quick. But she and her husband did go to the funeral. They drove to Springfield, Utah for the funeral, which she also thought was unusual. She's like, everybody's here. Why are you taking her to Springfield? But once she understood that, Tammy was from Springfield, all her family was in Springfield, she understood that. But at first it struck her as being kind of odd. She said he did not seem mournful at the funeral. So they actually returned that morning and brought back some McDonald's for the kids and stuff. And Garth said, just leave it. And by then, there was a lot of people there. So, but interestingly enough, Todd and Chad had developed a friendship. Todd said he would go over and help Chad with plumbing issues and vice versa. But Chad had been over to their home prior to this death and not long before she died. And he had told Todd that Tammy's mission was that she was going to die before she was 50 years old. Now, Todd didn't know how old Tammy was, but this came back to him. This conversation came back to him after he learned that Tammy had died. But when he was there that morning, he looked at Chad and he said, well, I guess it happened. And Chad said, yeah, it happened. And then he said, Chad turned away from the kids and then said to him, the kids didn't know. He never told the kids about his vision that Tammy was going to die before the age of 50. Interesting. Then they did not go to the memorial Wednesday because they had been to the funeral on Tuesday. So after the memorial, since they didn't go, they took dinner over to his house. And it was at that point that Chad tells them he can't live there. I can't live here. I'm going to go stay at a condo that my friend has that he's not there very well. He didn't say they. He used they. They don't stay there very often, so I'm going to go over and stay there. He's going to let me stay there. And they're assuming, oh, it's a guy, it's a man. And then on October 26th, 7 days after Tammy's death, they have Chad over for dinner. They had actually decided, we want to check on Chad. We're gonna call him up and find out where he's at. We're going to take him over a pizza. They call him and he says, no, don't come over. I'll come over your house. So he comes over their house. He didn't want them to see who he was living with. So he comes over and he tells them, I have met the woman I'm going to marry. 7 days after this, 7 days. So they're like, we would like to meet this woman. So the next week, about a week later, he comes over with Lori for dinner. And he said they were very affectionate, sat right next to each other. He had his hand on her knee. They were giggling. He said it was very awkward, very, very awkward. They're giggling and laughing like a couple of teenagers. Now, when you first meet somebody, general conversation, you're like, hey, what? Were you married? Yes, I was married, Lori says. My husband died of a heart attack. And then they said, well, you have any kids? And Chad pipes up and says, oh, she has a girl, but she passed away. No mention of JJ. No. Or her other son. Then Chad lets them know he's going to go to Hawaii to write a book. And then they were talking about plans that they had to take the kids to Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm. I've never been there. I want to go. What kids? What kids? Kids? His kids. His grown kids. No mention of Tylee and JJ. No mention of her kids. They got the impression she was like an empty nester. Now, Alice had they had both heard of Lori Daybell because they listened to Melanie Gibbs' podcast, and she had mentioned Lori Daybell. But they didn't know what she looked like, hadn't met her before this. At this point, the court breaks for lunch. There's a long lunch, and then they come back, and they finish the testimony of these two individuals. Now, a few times Alice mentioned that after her mother's death, Emma got quite sick. I don't know if she had just had a baby. That's my impression. She had just had a baby and that she was losing weight and she was very, very sick. So she had gone over to check on Emma and clean Emma's house, bring her some food. And this is how she learned that the kids were missing. Tammy and Tylee and JJ. So she asked Chad next time she saw him, where are these kids? And he said, it's a custody battle thing. The kids are fine. And Alice asked him, you told us she had a daughter. Did she have more than one daughter? Because she's talking about Tylee and JJ. Did she have more than one? Oh, no, just one daughter. Well, you told us she died. I never said that. He denied saying it. Okay. Because she's like, how many daughters do you have? Does Lori have? Yeah. And then in a later conversation, this is in March. We're fast forwarding to March of 2020 now. They've already learned that they're married, and because they came over after their marriage to show them all the wedding photos. And there was nobody in these photos, which they said were a lot of photos. Nobody in these photos but Chad and Lori. No relatives, no children. So they fast forward, Chad comes over in March and they're talking to him. And now everybody's still looking for these kids. And they're asking him, where are these kids? And he says, his response was, she didn't like me. She didn't like people. She didn't, past tense, didn't. And that's what they're quoting him as saying. But during this conversation, Chad says, Jesus wants me to ask you if you'll put your house up to get Lori's bond. By this time, Lori's in jail. Lori's been extradited from Hawaii back to Idaho because she couldn't produce the kids. And he is asking various people to put their homes up for the bond. So, of course, they did not do that. Thank God. Yeah, because that's just nuts. One additional thing Todd said was when he did go to the funeral, he felt like Chad just kind of wanted to get it all over with, like he was in a hurry to get it over with. I thought that was interesting. Oh, the other thing that Chad had told them was that Tammy had appeared to him in a vision after her death to let him know that she was fine with all this. She's fine with the marriage to Lori. She's fine with she's fine with everything. Okay. So strange. Of course, Todd says, Chad would talk about his books, and he said he took those books as fiction for the most part, that Chad would have these visions and that the visions part was the fiction. He said they didn't align with his religion. They were sort of outside the teachings of the church, and he just wasn't buying into it. All right, the next person on the stand was a coworker of Tammy's from the school. And she testified that she went to Zumba with Tammy twice a week. Tammy was not struggling with the exercise, didn't stop early. She could keep up, and was an active and healthy person. And she had seen Tammy the Friday before she died. She died on Saturday. She saw her that Friday. She said, no complaints, nothing going on with her. She was not sick. Next person on the stand was a woman by the name of Taylor Ballard. She was an insurance broker, or is an insurance broker, a health insurance broker. Chad had gone to her after Tammy's death to inquire about health insurance, because as of October 31st, he was going to lose his health insurance that he had through Tammy. So he needed to get health insurance. And applying for it at this point, he would still have to wait for it to go into effect in January. But anyway, he was applying for it for himself and his children, Seth, Leah, and Mark. So, and they had several interactions about this health insurance. And he asked, what if I add a wife? What if I get remarried? Can I add a wife? And she's like, oh, we'll deal with that when it happens. Well, it had already happened, but he didn't say that. And then later on, when he wants to put Lori on the insurance, there's no mention of children, none whatsoever, no mention of children. So once this broker learns that there are children, she's like, is there anyone else living in the home? Because this is one of the questions on the insurance application. Even if you're not applying for insurance for them, they need to know who else is living in the home. And he's like, no, nobody else lives in the home, just me, Lori, these other people. So he got the health insurance, paid the premiums, that kind of thing. Then when the children went missing, she was getting, alarm bells are going off in her head. So she looked up the life insurance that he had, because she was wondering if maybe Tammy's death was not what it appeared, and that he had fraudulently gotten the payout of this life insurance. So interesting testimony. So we will continue with today's testimony tomorrow. I will see you then. Have a great Thursday. It's Thursday. Where did this week go? Have a great Thursday. I will see you all tomorrow on Crafting and Crime Daily. Bye.